I came back from a 2-week fishing trip in Alaska to find a massive white and blue pontoon boat parked on my private boat lift. I stood there, duffel bag still slung over my shoulder, trying to process the audacity. My property now holding up a $30,000 eyesore like it was some public marina. And I already knew who was behind it: Valerie Prescott. HOA board president, professional busybody, and self-declared queen of our waterfront community. She had the haircut, the tone, and the laminated clipboard to match. I'd had run-ins with her before, warnings about my grass length, a passive-aggressive letter about excessive wind chimes, but this was next level. I marched straight to her house, still jet-lagged and smelling like trout. She was trimming her hedges in a full sun hat and pastel sweater set, like she was filming an infomercial. "Valerie," I said, "why the hell is there a pontoon boat on my lift?" She didn't even flinch. "Oh, that's mine, you weren't using it and I had to move it off community docks for cleaning." "It's just temporary." "Temporary? You trespassed on my dock, that's private property." She waved a gloved hand like I was being dramatic. "Zayden, don't be so territorial. The HOA allows for temporary accommodations in emergency situations." I blinked. Emergency. "Your boat getting dirty is not an emergency." "It's not just dirty," she said, lowering her sunglasses. "There was algae forming. It's a safety concern." She turned back to her hedges like that was the end of it. I didn't bother arguing. I took pictures, pulled the security cam footage, and called my lawyer the next morning. He confirmed what I already knew: she had no right. Not under HOA bylaws, not under state law, not under any stretch of arrogant imagination. I sent her a certified letter 3 days' notice to remove the boat, or I'd consider it abandoned and charge storage fees. 3 days passed. Nothing, so I sold it, found a local marina owner who needed parts for a rental fleet. He paid me cash, even helped tow it out. I figured that was the end of it, until Valerie showed up at my door the next morning, red in the face, shaking an HOA violation notice like it was a court summons. Valerie's voice cut through the morning air like a rusty hinge. "You had no legal right to sell my property, Zayden. That was a felony and you'll be hearing from our attorney." I leaned against the doorframe, keeping the screen door between us. She was gripping the violation form so tightly it was crumpling at the corners, her knuckles pale against the paper. "Let me guess," I said. "You're charging me for unauthorized boat removal on my own dock." "No. You're being fined for destruction of HOA member property and violating community cooperation guidelines," she snapped. "Destruction?" I raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure selling something in perfect condition isn't destruction." "And cooperation guidelines, those aren't legally enforceable." Her jaw twitched. "You should have contacted the board and requested mediation." "I gave you 3 days in writing. That was mediation." "I was going to move it," she said, voice rising. "You didn't give me time. 3 days and a certified letter is more than enough time. You ignored it. That's on you." She took a step forward, jabbing the paper toward me. "You're going to reimburse me the full value or we'll press charges." I folded my arms. "Great, let's do that." "I'm sure the police will love hearing how you trespassed, used private property without consent, and then tried to find the owner when they handled it legally." Her mouth moved, but no sound came out, just a stuttering inhale. Then she turned on her heel and stormed off down the path, heels clicking like angry metronomes. I didn't hear from her for 3 days. Then came the notice from the HOA attorney, delivered by courier. It was printed on heavy cream paper, with a gold-embossed letterhead that screamed money and overcompensation. The letter demanded immediate reimbursement of $28,000 for unauthorized liquidation of personal property, and threatened civil court proceedings if I did not comply within 10 business days. I called my lawyer again. He reviewed the footage, the letter I'd sent, and the HOA's bylaws. His response was short: "Let them try." But I wasn't interested in just waiting. I wanted to know how deep this rabbit hole went. I pulled the property maps and zoning details from the county assessor's office. Buried in those records, I found something strange. The HOA had filed an easement modification for several waterfront lots last year, mine included. The modification language was vague, referencing temporary community usage rights in cases of emergency or maintenance. That sounded suspiciously like the nonsense Valerie had spewed earlier. I drove down to City Hall and requested the original filing. The clerk brought out a manila folder thick with attachments. Inside, I found scanned signatures from several homeowners, including mine, but the signature on my form didn't match any version of my handwriting. The date listed was during a weekend I'd been out of state for a cousin's wedding, forgery. I asked the clerk who submitted the paperwork. Valerie Prescott, she said, flipping through the intake log. She submitted the whole packet on behalf of the HOA. I took photos of the documents and headed straight to the sheriff's office. Detective Rowan met me in a quiet interview room. He had that calm, methodical energy that told me he'd seen worse than HOA drama but wasn't about to let anything slide. "You're saying this signature was forged?" he asked, tapping the easement form. "Correct. I was in Nevada that weekend. And I don't sign anything without reading it first." He nodded slowly, flipping through the photos I'd taken. "This isn't just a boundary dispute. If this was used to justify property access, it's criminal. And she used it to justify putting her boat on my lift." He looked up. "Wait, she did it. Personally, I have security footage of her guiding it in." He leaned back and sighed. "All right. We'll start with a handwriting analysis and cross-check signatures. If it's forged, we'll bring in the DA." By the next week, things escalated. The sheriff's office raided the HOA's office trailer, really just a converted shed beside the clubhouse, and seized computers, files, and several boxes of documents. Valerie was nowhere to be found. Neighbors gathered around the scene like it was a block party with gossip instead of snacks. Word spread fast. Turns out I wasn't the only one whose signature had been magically conjured. 4 other homeowners came forward, all claiming fake approvals on HOA filings. One elderly couple had supposedly donated a strip of their backyard for a community walking path that no one had ever seen. When Valerie finally resurfaced, she went on the defensive. She called an emergency HOA meeting, which I attended just to watch the implosion. She stood at the front of the clubhouse, a shaky PowerPoint projected behind her titled "Clarifying Community Agreements." Her voice trembled as she spoke, trying to reframe everything as miscommunication and clerical inconsistencies. I raised my hand. She ignored me. I raised it again. "Valerie, have you informed the board that you're under criminal investigation?" Murmurs swept the room. She looked directly at me. "There is no investigation. These are wild accusations by a hostile homeowner." Detective Rowan walked in just then, plainclothes but unmistakable. He didn't say a word, just handed her an envelope and stepped aside. Her face sagged as she opened it. "Miss Prescott," he said, "you're being served with a subpoena. The district attorney will be in touch." The meeting fell apart after that. Some board members walked out, others demanded answers. One guy in the back yelled that he wanted his HOA dues refunded. Valerie sat down in her chair, stunned, as her empire crumbled around her. Later that week, the HOA board held a vote to suspend her pending the investigation. They named an interim president, Sandra, a retired schoolteacher with zero tolerance for BS. I liked her immediately. Meanwhile, I filed a small claims countersuit for trespassing and unauthorized use of property. My lawyer said it wasn't about the money, it was about establishing precedent. If we could prove in court that I had every right to remove the boat, it would kill any chance of Valerie suing me later. The court date was set for early next month. In the meantime, I installed a new camera system, twice as sharp and 3 times as hidden. I wasn't taking chances again. Down the block, Valerie's boatless slip sat empty, a quiet little reminder of how fast power can vanish when it's built on lies. Neighbors started stopping by more often, asking how I'd figured it all out. I told them the truth. Never trust people who hide behind rules they don't follow themselves. And always read what you're signing, especially if Valerie Prescott hands it to you. I arrived at the county courthouse just after sunrise, coffee in hand and a folder tucked under my arm packed with every shred of evidence I'd collected over the last month. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as I walked in, passing a few sleepy-eyed city employees dragging their feet toward the entrance. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. The civil hearing was scheduled for 8:30 sharp. My attorney, Mallory Keene, was already waiting inside the courtroom, reviewing documents with the same intensity she used when cross-examining hostile witnesses. A former prosecutor who'd switched to private practice after burning out on criminal trials, she had a voice like sandpaper and a reputation for dismantling nonsense with surgical precision. "Judge McAllister's presiding," she said without looking up. "He doesn't tolerate theatrics, so let Valerie dig her own hole. Just answer what he asks and let me handle the rest." I nodded and sat beside her, watching the minutes tick down. Valerie breezed in 2 minutes before the gavel, flanked by her new attorney, a slick, overconfident man in a navy blue suit who looked like he billed by the eyebrow raise. She didn't make eye contact, but I caught the way her jaw tightened when she saw Mallory. Judge McAllister called the proceedings to order, his gravelly voice echoing through the room. The case was straightforward. I was seeking compensation for trespassing and unauthorized use of private property. Valerie's counterclaim was for the alleged illegal sale of her pontoon boat. Mallory opened with the timeline, laying out the events in clean, chronological order. She presented the certified letter I'd sent, the dock ownership deed, and the security footage showing Valerie directing her boat onto my lift. When she handed over the time-stamped footage, Judge McAllister raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Then came the forged easement paperwork. Mallory passed the judge the county assessor's certified copies, along with a notarized affidavit from the city clerk confirming that the signature on my lot's easement form had not been witnessed in person, a legal requirement under state statute. Valerie's attorney objected, claiming the easement wasn't relevant to the case at hand. McAllister overruled him. "It's directly relevant," he said. "If your client used falsified paperwork to justify her actions, that impacts the legitimacy of her claim." Valerie shifted in her seat, her arms tightening across her chest. When it was her turn to testify, she tried to pivot. "I believed the HOA had temporary access rights due to the emergency clause, Miss Prescott," Mallory interrupted. "Where in the bylaws is algae growth defined as an emergency?" She hesitated. "There's precedent, please answer the question." "There isn't a specific line," she admitted. "But the board has discretion to act in the community's interest." Mallory nodded. "So no documented emergency, no written permission, and no prior discussion with the homeowner." Valerie looked away. The judge leaned forward. "Did you ever receive a response to the certified letter requesting removal of your property?" "No," she muttered. "Did you attempt to contact the plaintiff before the deadline expired?" "No." A silence stretched in the courtroom. McAllister glanced at both attorneys, then said, "I'm ready to rule. Miss Prescott, you trespassed and misused private property. The plaintiff acted within his rights to remove and sell the vessel under abandoned property statutes. Your counterclaim is dismissed." Judgment in favor of the plaintiff for the full amount requested plus fees. Mallory didn't even react. She just began packing up her briefcase with mechanical efficiency. Valerie froze in place, then asked, "So, I have to pay him?" McAllister didn't respond. He'd already moved on to the next case. Outside, I exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. I turned to thank Mallory, but she was already walking toward the parking lot. "Send me the check when it clears," she said over her shoulder. "And don't let her park anything on your property again." As I pulled out my keys, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number," I answered. "This is Detective Rowan," came the familiar voice. We need you at the station." Now, when I arrived, he was waiting with a manila envelope in his hand and a grim look that hadn't been there the last time we spoke. "We've been combing the HOA's files," he began. "Got a hit yesterday. Your signature wasn't the only one forged. We found over a dozen falsified easement agreements and 2 altered lien authorizations." My stomach dropped. "Lien authorizations?" He nodded. "Turns out Miss Prescott and the treasurer were using forged approvals to place liens on select homes. Then they'd issue fines through the HOA, claim non-payment, and quietly initiate foreclosure proceedings." I stared at him. "That's criminal fraud. Worse, it's racketeering. We've got 3 confirmed cases where elderly residents were pressured into selling after receiving bogus debt notices. One woman's home sold last year. The buyer, Valerie's cousin, bought it under an LLC for 60% of market." Rowan slid the envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of checks, emails, and a trail of transfers between the HOA's account and a series of shell companies. It was systematic, deliberate, and deeply illegal. "She's not just a nuisance," he said. "She's been running a real estate scam under the guise of neighborhood enforcement." I leaned back in my chair, trying to wrap my head around it. "What happens next?" "We're handing it to the district attorney. RICO charges are on the table. We're also contacting the state attorney general. With enough victims, this moves out of local jurisdiction." That evening, unmarked vehicles rolled down Bay Hollow Drive. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as Valerie was led out of her home in handcuffs, her sweater draped over her wrists. The news trucks arrived less than an hour later. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I walked back to my dock, now empty and quiet under the moonlight. I sat on the edge, letting my feet dangle above the water, thinking about the older couple across the street who nearly lost their home over a late HOA fee they swore they'd already paid. About the single mother 2 blocks over who moved out last fall after a foreclosure she couldn't explain. The next morning, the interim board called an emergency community meeting. Sandra, the retired teacher now acting president, stood at the front of the clubhouse with a printed stack of documents and a microphone. "We've suspended all fines, liens, and enforcement activity effective immediately," she announced. "And we've retained an independent forensic auditor to investigate HOA finances going back 5 years. Murmurs buzzed through the crowd. "We're also drafting a petition to dissolve the HOA altogether," she continued. "Once we have the signatures, we'll submit it to the city for approval." The room erupted in applause. I didn't say much. I just signed the petition and passed it along. Later that week, I got a letter from the DA's office. They were preparing to file charges against Valerie and 2 former board members, multiple counts of fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit theft, and racketeering. Possible prison time. I kept the letter in my desk drawer. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making sure no one else got steamrolled by a woman who thought laminated rules gave her the right to steal. That night, I installed 2 solar lights on my dock, not to keep people out, but to make sure everything stayed visible. Because when people like Valerie operate in the shadows, the best weapon is light. 3 weeks after Valerie's arrest, the neighborhood looked and felt different. Folks who used to pull their blinds tight were now walking their dogs in the evening, chatting across lawns, waving like they'd shaken off a long, invisible weight. HOA signs had been quietly removed from the clubhouse door, and the metal lockbox that once held anonymous behavioral reports was now rusting in a dumpster behind the tennis court. I hadn't planned on being the guy who took down an entire corrupt HOA, but the ripple effects kept spreading. The local paper ran a front-page story. "Waterfront HOA scandal exposes forgery, fraud, and foreclosure scheme." It quoted the district attorney, who confirmed that Valerie and 2 associates, her treasurer and secretary, had been indicted by a grand jury. The charges were serious: wire fraud, falsifying public records, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy to commit theft. The The state attorney general had also filed a civil suit to recover assets acquired through the scam. A few days later, I was contacted by the AG's office. They were building a restitution fund for residents who'd lost money or property because of the forged liens and fines. They asked if I'd be willing to testify in the civil case as a material witness. I agreed on the spot. The hearing was held in the County Superior Courthouse, a granite building with tall windows and the kind of silence that made your shoes sound too loud. I wasn't nervous, just eager to see the whole rotten structure officially dismantled. The state's lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Leona Graves, prepared me in a conference room before the proceeding. "We'll need you to explain how you discovered the forgery," she said, flipping through a binder the width of a phone book. "And how the HOA's actions impacted your property rights. Keep it factual. The emotional weight will take care of itself." When I took the stand, Valerie sat across the room in a gray blazer that looked borrowed. Her eyes stayed fixed on the table in front of her. No sunglasses, no pastel sweaters, no clipboard. Just a woman surrounded by attorneys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Graves walked me through the events in order, her tone measured and deliberate. "When you first discovered the boat on your lift, what was your initial response?" I asked her to remove it. She refused. And did she reference any legal right to place it there? She claimed emergency usage rights under the HOA. "And at that point, did you believe those rights existed?" "No, I checked the bylaws. Nothing supported her claim." Graves turned and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, may we submit the HOA's own governing documents into record?" The judge nodded, and the bailiff collected the packet. Graves continued. "When you reviewed the easement filings at the county assessor's office, what did you find?" "A signature authorizing shared access on my property." "It wasn't mine." "Were you in town the day that signature was dated?" "No, I was in Nevada." "I have travel receipts from the hotel." "Did you ever give verbal or written permission for the HOA to file that easement?" "Never." Valerie's defense attorney objected, claiming the HOA had a good faith belief those approvals were valid. But the judge had already seen the handwriting analysis, the video surveillance timestamps, and the compiled affidavits from other homeowners with forged documents. The final nail came when Graves submitted a recorded deposition from Valerie's former treasurer, who'd flipped on her in exchange for a reduced sentence. In the video, he admitted that Valerie directed him to fill in missing signatures and streamline approvals to keep certain projects moving. He detailed how they'd used those doctored forms to justify fines, engineer foreclosures, and seize properties through quiet title actions, then route them to buyers connected to Valerie's family. The judge ruled decisively. The easement modifications were declared fraudulent and void. The HOA's authority was suspended indefinitely, pending court-supervised dissolution. A lien recovery task force would review all past enforcement actions for signs of misconduct. The restitution fund would be seeded with assets seized from Valerie's accounts and the sale of a waterfront property she'd fraudulently acquired. Outside the courthouse, I found Sandra waiting on a bench, a manila folder in her lap and a tired smile on her face. "I've got the final petition signatures," she said. "Over 2/3 of homeowners. The city council's reviewing it next week." I sat beside her. "Think they'll approve the HOA's termination? They'd be fools not to. No one wants to be associated with this mess." She opened the folder and showed me a draft of the new neighborhood charter, a simple document outlining voluntary maintenance contributions, a shared calendar for community events, and a clause banning any future HOA formation without unanimous consent. It was 3 pages long, clean, transparent. "Feels like starting over," I said. "That's the idea," she replied. The city council approved the petition the following week in a unanimous vote. A city clerk came out to Bay Hollow Drive and removed the last official HOA placard from the entrance gate. Someone hung a wreath on the signpost that evening. It stayed there for months. As for Valerie, the criminal trial was scheduled for the fall. She was out on bond, but her passport had been confiscated and her assets frozen. The court had appointed a guardian ad litem to oversee her elderly victim's restitution, and the AG's office made it clear that prison time was likely. News crews stopped coming after a while. The story lost its shock value once justice started doing its job. I went back to my routine early fishing trips, weekend work on the house, and the occasional beer with neighbors who now stopped to chat instead of whispering about HOA fines. The dock was mine again, and it stayed that way. One evening, I found a handwritten note tucked under the cushion of my patio chair. No envelope, just a torn scrap of stationery. It read, "Thank you for not backing down. You saved more than just your own property." There was no return address. No one ever claimed it. I folded it and placed it in the drawer with the court letter and the old copy of the forged easement. Not out of sentimentality, just as a reminder that standing up doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it means documenting, questioning, and waiting for the moment when the truth hits like a spotlight. And when it does, the shadows don't stand a chance.